Hello there, and welcome back to the second part of my two-part series on the Intro to Chess. In the first video, we looked at how the pieces moved and how they captured. You can find that one right up here. And in this one, we're going to be focused on the rules of chess. Now, this board game has rules just like any other, but the sheer number of rules in chess is what makes it really confusing. That's why we're going to be focused on the essential three. The first one, which is how to properly set up your board. This is actually very heavy. We're going to look at how the game is played turn by turn with both sides. And we're also going to learn about the ultimate goal of chess. Let's get right into it. To make setting up a chessboard easier, make sure you can see the coordinates on the side of your board. These are indicated by the letters A through H and the numbers 1 through 8. You always want to say the letter first and then the number when you describe a square. So for example, going to this square would be going to the square F5, because it's on the F file and the 5th rank, which combines to say F5. If you were on this square, it would be C3. You're on the C file and the 3rd rank. When you're setting up the pieces on the chessboard, the white pieces always go on the 1st and the 2nd rank, while the black pieces go on the 7th and the 8th rank. A good trick to know if you've set up the pieces correctly is that the bottom right-hand square, which is H1 for white, or A8 if you're looking at it from black's point of view, this square should always be a white square. Now for the pieces. Let's start with that corner square H1. Your rooks will start out in the corner, so one goes on H1 and another goes on A1. Knights will go next to the rooks, on G1 and B1. Bishops will go next to the knights, on F1 and C1. Now, the two squares left open are E1 and D1. This is where your king and queen go. One last board setup rule you must remember is that your queen will always start on her color. The white queen will start on a white square, and a black queen will start on a black square. That means the white queen will go on D1, and the king will go on E1. Now that you've set up all of your big pieces, it's time for the pawns. These guys will be easy because they all go on the 2nd rank in front of your pieces. Once you've placed all 8 pawns on the board, you get the completed starting position for white. Could you do the same for black? Once you set up one side, the other is really easy. Just copy what you did for white's pieces and you're sure to get it right. With black's pieces set up as well, it's time to start the game. Alright, now that you know the correct setup for the pieces, I put them back on the board and we'll move to the next topic, how the game is actually played. So in chess, it's a turn-based game. The game starts with white playing the first move, and after white makes his move, it's black's turn. Black will choose to make a move, white will take his turn, black will take his turn, and so on and so forth. When it's your turn, you have to move. There is no way to pass or forfeit your move. You have so many options on every turn, so you have to pick one of them and live with the consequences. On your turn, you can move one of your pieces to a free square, or you can capture one of your opponent's pieces. Remember that capturing a piece is taking your piece and moving it onto the square where your opponent's piece is, and removing your opponent's piece from the board. And lastly, remember that your knights are the only piece that can move over other pieces. They can jump over your pieces and they can jump over your opponent's pieces. But your pawns, your rooks, your bishops, your queen, and your king all cannot do that. This ability is only limited to your knight. Here's a little exercise that I like to do. With your board correctly set up once again, I'd like to ask you a question. How many potential moves could white make on his first turn? Now, you can only make one move per turn, but how many potential ways could white actually start the game? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that. All right, hopefully you got your answer locked in, because I'm here to tell you that answer is 20. Yes, there are 20 possible ways that white could start a chess game. 20 different moves that he could play. If you got an answer of 16, you're so close, but I know exactly where you went wrong. Let's go to the board to take a look. So first, let's look at the pawn moves that you can do. Remember that pawns can move 1 or 2 squares on their first turn. So each of these 8 pawns has 2 possible moves they could play, making 16 total moves. But remember as well that your knights have the special ability to jump over pieces. That means your knights could move to A3 or C3 and F3 or H3. That's another 4 moves, bringing up the total to 20 moves, 16 from the pawns and 4 from the knights. A chess game can end in 3 different ways: a win, a loss, or a draw. Not a drawing, a draw. It's a totally different thing, and I'll show you soon. So first, a win. A win is when you, destroy your opponent and win the game. You defeat the enemy position and you conquer the board game. A win for you means a loss for your opponent. Now, a loss is the exact opposite. It's when you lose the game. It's when your king and your position gets defeated. A loss for you means a win for your opponent. And lastly, a draw. So a draw is like a tie. It's where nobody wins, but nobody loses. So the game was fought equally, could have been equal from the beginning to the end, but the end result is that both sides tied. Most of the time, the game of chess ends in something called checkmate. And if you've watched my last 2 videos, that might sound familiar, right? This is LRJ Chess, signing off with a checkmate. Well, what is checkmate, you may ask? Well, checkmate is the ultimate goal of chess. Checkmate is a situation where one side puts the enemy king into an attack, and there is no way to escape that attack. If you can make a direct attack against the enemy king, but they can escape and continue the game, then that's not checkmate. That's something called check. I want to make sure that you know that if your king is in check, you are required to get it out of the attack. You are required to get it to safety. Your king cannot stay in check for more than 1 move. So if your king gets attacked, your next move has to be getting it out of the attack. And if you can't do that, well, I hate to break it to you, but you've lost the game. Let's compare 2 positions of check and checkmate for an example. One will show a checkmate and the other will show a check. Can you spot the difference? I'll give you some time to think about it. All right, if you said the left one was checkmate, you'd be correct. Let's look at each position in greater detail. In the example on the left, the white king is cut off by the 2 black rooks, so it can't escape the attack from the rook on h8 without moving into the line of sight of the other rook. In the right-hand example, the king is attacked, but it can retreat 1 square to escape the bishop's line of sight while staying away from the rook or any of the pawns. So in this case, king to d3, moving the king down 1 square, would get the king out of the check from the bishop and into safety, because no other piece is attacking the king. Next, I'll show you 3 ways that you can defend against a check. These 3 options will be very important, because the only goal when you're put into check is to make sure your king gets to safety. It's your most important piece, and you always need to get it to safety. There are 3 different ways to defend against a check. Here they are. The first one is to move your king. If your opponent puts you in check, you can move your king out of the way. The second is to capture the checking piece. If your opponent puts you in check, There could be some instances where you can take that piece. And third, you can block the check. What this means is putting a piece in between the checking piece and your king, which would block the piece's line of sight and it would no longer go to your king. Let's go through these examples one by one. So first, you have the direct approach, which is moving your king. If your opponent puts you in check, just like this position we were looking at, the simplest way to get to safety is to move the king out of the line of sight of that piece. So for example, in this checkmate versus check comparison position from before, the king can simply move away, it would escape the check, and it would be safe. The second thing that you could do is capture the checking piece. So let's go to another example. This second option is not always possible, but you never want to miss it. Sometimes your opponent will put you in check, but the piece that's attacking your king is in a danger zone. Before moving your king right away, you always want to look to see if the checking piece can be taken. If so, that'll be a surefire way to stop the attack. Remember, however, that you won't necessarily want to take the checking piece if you'll lose more material in the process. Let's look at two quick examples, with one showing a good capture and another showing a bad capture. With the position on the screen, the bishop on a6 is checking the king along this diagonal. You may see the white knight on b4 has the bishop in its line of sight. The knight could capture this bishop. If we look around, the bishop isn't protected by any piece. So if white captured this bishop, he would get rid of the checking piece. So now there's no attack onto the white king. But he would also capture a bishop for free, leaving white with an extra piece. That's definitely a good capture. Let's look at a bad capture now. In this position, the black rook on h1 is checking the white king. The white queen on e4 could capture this rook on h1. By taking the rook, it would eliminate the checking piece and make the white king safe. But there's a problem in this situation. That black rook is protected by the queen all the way on h6. So if we look at a sample variation, if the white queen captures the rook, she helps to protect the king and get out of check, but black would respond by moving his queen to h1 and capturing the white queen. What this ended up doing was white traded his queen for a rook. And since you know that queens are stronger than rooks, this would be a bad capture. This would be an example where white would not want to take the rook. So instead, he would have to choose to move his king out of the check. And the final way that you can get out of check is by blocking. Let's say a bishop puts your king in check. So in this example, the bishop on e6 is attacking the king on b3 and putting it in check. The bishop looks along this entire diagonal until it hits the king. So of course, this is a check. If a pawn were to move to any of the squares on the bishop's line of sight, but between the king and the bishop, then that would block the check. Since the bishop can't jump over any piece, its line of sight would be blocked and it would no longer be able to attack the king. So either moving this pawn or by moving this pawn, they both succeed in protecting the white king and making a position where the bishop is blocked by the pawn and there is no more check. By blocking the bishop's attack, your king is now safe.
All right, it's time for a pop quiz. I have a question for you. What is the only piece in chess that cannot have its check blocked? I'll give you some time to think about that. You do have a couple options, but if you said the knight, you would be correct. Remember that knights are those pieces that move in the funky L shapes. So since no other piece can follow that same movement pattern, there is no piece that can block the knight. And also, since the knight can jump over pieces, that's another reason why there's nothing that can block the knight's check. Knights are super tricky. You're going to be finding this out a lot, but you have to pay attention to them because a knight attacking the king can be very dangerous. Check and checkmate are two of the most important topics in chess that you'll be facing on every game that you play. So I'd like to take a break and we're going to look at a review quiz. In this quiz, I'm going to be asking you about questions regarding check or checkmate, and your job is to figure out which is which. You'll also need to figure out how to escape a check, if it is a check. And at the end, you'll be able to figure out the best way to escape check. Not just a way, but the best. I do have a request though. Make sure that after you finish this quiz, you only move on if you get 100%. If you get anything less than 100%, I want you to pause, I want you to review the quiz, and I want you to try it again. The reason why is because these two topics will be fundamental to your chess growth. So if you don't have a perfect grasp on them, then it needs more work. But don't stress. There will be a lot of things in your chess journey that needs more work. You're not going to get everything the first time around absolutely perfectly. If you're stuck on one of these questions, or you don't understand why one move is played and not the other, just leave a comment down below and I'll help you out. But let's say you got 100% on this one, then it would be time to move on. Then you've proven to yourself and to me that you really know this stuff. So you're ready for the next part. And also in general, with these quizzes, when I tell you to redo them until you get 100%, the reason why I say this is because I hope you see how these quizzes work for practice. If you try it and you get a 70%, or you get a couple wrong, and then you review it and try it again and you get 100%, that shows growth right there. It shows me and it shows you that you got something wrong, you learned from your mistakes, and then you got 100%. These things will happen in your chess games all the time. And in some positions, it's only going to take one move for you to turn a winning game into a losing game. I've done that before, and it's never a good feeling. So the more often you practice something like this, the less often it will happen in your game, and the less often you'll be making mistakes like that. That's the way to chess improvement. So with that said, let's jump into the quiz. Here is question number 1. Is this position check or checkmate? And as a note, I'll leave the position up for 5 seconds each time. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Question number 2. Is this position check or checkmate? Question number 3. How should white get out of check in this position? Question number 4. How should black get out of check in this position? Question number 5. How should white get out of check in this position? And for the final question, how should black get out of check in this position? All 3 options are possible, and you have to figure out which is the best. All right, and with that, we've concluded the quiz. Let's jump into some review. So we'll start at the very beginning with the review with check or checkmate. This was the first position that I gave you, and I asked if this position was check or checkmate. As you can see, the black queen is currently putting the white king in check. So we have to see if there's any way for white to get out of the check. We have 3 options. You can move your king, you can block the check, or you can capture the checking piece. So first of all, since the queen is in the king's line of sight, we would look at that. So the king cannot capture the queen because the knight is guarding the queen. So if the king moved onto the square where the queen is, it would be in check by the knight. So that would be an illegal move. That means that white cannot capture the checking piece. Since there is no space between the checking piece and the king, that means no piece can block, so white has to find a place to move his king. If we look at all of the squares that the king could go to, there is only one square that is not guarded by an enemy piece or already occupied, and that would be the square G4. Since G4 is a safe square, this position was only check because the white king could escape. Let's move on to position number 2. In this one, I asked if it was check or checkmate. Here, the rook on D8 is putting the king in check. So let's look at the 3 ways to escape check. First of all, they're right next to each other again, so the king could try to take the rook. But the problem is that the rook on D1 guards the rook on D8. So just like the position before, if the king were to capture the rook, it would move into the line of sight of the other rook, putting it in check once again. Therefore, capturing the rook on D8 would be an illegal move. Since there's no space between the king and the rook, there's no way to block the check, so that means the only thing that black could do is move his king to get out of check. 3 squares are already blocked by his own pieces. We know he cannot take the rook, and he cannot move to D7 either because that square is guarded by both rooks. Therefore, the king has no safe squares to move to, and this position is checkmate. On to position number 3. Here I asked you how you could get out of check. So first off, you need to see that the knight is putting the king in check. Since the knight is the one checking the king, there is no way to block the check. We could capture the knight, but unfortunately that would get the queen taken right back. And since we know queens are stronger than knights, that's not something that white would want to do. So going back to the starting position, the only way that white can get out of check is to move his king. So if you chose any safe square for the king, like C1, D1, E1, E2, or D3, you would be correct. Any of these moves gets the king out of check and onto a safe square. Now for the next position. Over here, the bishop on F7 is putting our king in check. So you have to figure out how to get out of check here. Of course, the king could move. He has 2 free squares that he could escape to. But at the same time, this bishop on F7 has no defenders. None of the other white pieces are protecting this bishop. So black could choose to capture this bishop. This would be a free piece, giving black an extra bishop and stopping the check. So this would be the best move. If you said king captures bishop or king takes F7, then you would be correct. On to the next position. Over here, the rook on C1 was giving the white king check. Now at first glance, you may recognize this pawn structure that I've had it in some positions and see that the white king has no escape squares. But there are 2 pieces that can block the check. The first being the rook and the second being the bishop. Now here's where this puzzle gets a little bit more difficult. One of these moves is correct and one of these moves is wrong. If we take a look at the rook blocking the check first, you can see that there are no pieces guarding this rook. So the black rook could take you for free. And now you lost a rook and you're still in check. So this is not correct. When we look at the other way to block, bishop going to F1 puts the bishop right next to the king, so it blocks the check and it moves to a square that's protected by the king. In this case, if the black rook captures the bishop, the white king would take the black rook.
What this means is that the correct move in this position was bishop to f1, and that would be the answer to this position. Let's move on to the final quiz question. In this position, the rook on e8 was putting the black king in check. And over here, we have all three different choices of escaping check. The king could move to the one escape square it has. The black rook could capture the white rook, or the black queen could block the check. This is what you'll see a lot of in chess. You have a lot of choices, and you have to figure out which one is the best. So here's how we do it. We have to look at each one by one. The most forcing move here is the capture. We take the white rook. And if you look at this position, black could take the white rook for free. But don't get too hasty. That's not the best move. You always want to think about what your opponent would do after you play your move. That's something we will touch on a lot in future videos. Notice how your rook was protecting your queen. So if your rook moves away from the protection of your queen, the white queen would take your queen, and white would gain a queen for a rook, which is a winning material advantage. So if we're not careful, black would lose his queen. The second way would be to block the check with queen to g8. But this is bad for two reasons. First, you may instantly see the rook could capture the queen, and we know that queens are stronger than rooks, so this would be good for white and therefore bad for black. But you may also see the white queen all the way in the corner could also capture the black queen. And if this is done, this would actually be checkmate. So blocking the check with the queen is even worse than capturing the rook on e8. So this one is out of the question. Lastly, we have king move. If you play king to h7, you get out of the check. Your rook is still protected, your queen is still protected, and your king is safe. Because of that, king to h7 is the correct move. And that would be the only answer from this position. With that, we've finished the review of the quiz, and hopefully you got 100%.
If you got all of these puzzle questions correct, congrats! You definitely know the difference between check and checkmate and the best ways to escape check. If you didn't get them all right, that's okay. Remember to take a review session, ask some questions if you need, and try it again. Eventually, you will get everything correct. I'm 100% sure of that. Now that you've gone through the puzzles, you've learned about check and checkmate and how to escape check, there's one more tiny topic that I want to teach you about. It's much less likely to occur, but it's something you as chess players should still be aware of. It's something called stalemate. Now, stalemate kind of sounds like checkmate. It has the same ending, but it's way different. As you know, checkmate is when the king is under attack and has no legal moves. The game is over and that side has lost. But the difference in stalemate is that it's where the enemy has no legal moves, but its king is not in check. Now make sure you hear that carefully. I didn't say where the enemy king has no moves, but he's not in check. I said where the enemy as a whole. So what that means is any piece in your opponent's territory cannot make a move. There are no legal moves that your opponent could play to continue the game. But if their king is not under attack, then what would they do? They can't play any moves, but they haven't lost the game. In this case, stalemate would be a draw. The game would end in a tie because the opponent has not been defeated, but the opponent can't move at all. So the game ends in a draw. So just remember that slight distinction. If your opponent is getting to a spot where it doesn't seem like many of his pieces can move anywhere, just keep an eye out for stalemate. Make sure that at least one of his pieces always has a square that it can move to. Because you don't want to play a great game and then forget to give your opponent an escape square and have the game be a draw by stalemate. If you're going to checkmate him, you need to make sure to keep the enemy king under attack. So keep putting him in check until he has no way to escape from it, and that will be checkmate. Well, that concludes the ending section of this video. You've gotten through the main rules, you know how to set up the board, you know how the game is played, you know check and checkmate. You have all of the essential knowledge to play a game of chess. It might not be a great game of chess, but it will be a game of chess. I can guarantee that it will be one of the games of chess of all time. You know, I think all your hard work in this video deserves another fun fact. Did you know that the word checkmate is derived from an Arabic term shahmat, which literally translates to the king is ambushed? I think that's pretty cool. And in general, I think these chess translations as a whole are pretty cool. Did you know that my name translates to rook in Russian? I guess it's fitting that I'm a chess player. Alright, but with that, I think it's time we can finish off this video. So from this two-part video series, you've learned how the pieces move, you've learned how to capture, you've learned all the rules. You've learned a lot, and you're almost ready to start playing great chess. But I'd like to take a break from all of these lessons because I've thrown a lot at you in these last two videos. So in the next video, we're not going to have any chess strategies, we're not going to have any rules or any tips like that. The next video is going to be about chess history. Chess is a game that's been around for thousands of years. So I think any chess player should know the basic history of this wonderful game. So you can find me in the next video where I'll teach you about the basic chess history that anyone needs to know. Until then, this is LRJ Chess signing off with a checkmate. See? Now you know exactly what that means. Nice job.